And joining now live is Dr. Nicola Tweedie. Hi, Dr. Tweedie. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak to me today. I know that you're extremely busy, so very thankful for that, and also very thankful for the work that you're currently doing within the NHS. Very quickly for our audience, if you could give us a quick intro to the stuff that you're doing and the work that you do, that would be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me to discuss some of these really important issues today. I'm a chartered clinical psychologist. I specialise in adult mental health, and I work in the NHS in acute care. That's in hospitals and in crisis teams. And I also have an independent practice, and I see people across London and the southeast. I do some of that therapy by Skype, but currently now doing an awful lot more because of wanting to observe social distancing. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here and to share any helpful thoughts and ideas, and some references to resources that any of you might find helpful. So thank you very much for having me.
That's great. Thank you so much. So maybe we could start with something potentially quite simple. Like a lot of people, including myself, who are probably feeling quite anxious about this current state of things, and they're relatively complex if you start to add them all up. And as I sort of said in my intro, you know, people feeling quite stressed because there's suddenly a change, you know, in the way that they're having to operate. There's a drastic change in behavior, and, you know, to the point that you just made, you know, having to communicate via, you know, video conferences now, and, you know, that could be quite stressful for a few people or some people. But one of the key things is about all of this information. There's so much information that's being, you know, sort of pushed down to us, and not necessarily good information. There's a lot of misinformation in there as well. So how could we put sort of a framework around that to help us sort of better understand how to digest that, so that we can understand some of the triggers that might take place that are causing some of that, you know, elevated levels of stress and stress, I should say.
I think one of the most important things is to think about this really individually, that we all have better and worse days, whether we're in lockdown or, you know, whether in the time before, whenever that was. It sort of feels like some time ago. We all have moments of feeling like we've had a good day or a bad day, that we're able to look after ourselves better or worse, and we're all different. And I think some of the things that I've observed that are unhelpful are when people try to apply advice that just isn't going to fit for them. And I think you're quite right. We're in a process of a lot of change, and part of what makes it so anxiety provoking is there's very little information about how anybody is going to be able to manage at the end of this, when the end of this is going to be, and what that's going to look like. And all that we know is that we're in a process. And usually we can talk to somebody else who's been through something like this, or we can read a book, or we can read a blog that somebody else has written. And, you know, like for myself as a clinician, I'm looking at the very small bits of information that are slowly coming out of Wuhan and out of China. And they're doing a fantastic job, and, you know, sharing as much information as they can. And I'm sure in your domain that people are trying to think about ways in which they can prepare for what's coming, understand other people's experience. And I think whether it's mental health or whether it's about your professional domain, it's really important to think about how it applies to you and how easily it will be to fit that. So if you imagine going shopping, you wouldn't want to go trying on clothes that fit other people. You want to find something that fits for you. And whether it's about dietary advice or having a schedule, whether it's about fitting some relaxation into your day, whether it's about reaching out to friends and family, whether it's about talking about mental health issues, you need to start from where you are. And my advice would be to do 1%. to really underestimate the capacity that you have at the moment, because I think a lot of us are overestimating that, are trying to do a lot, maybe overworking, maybe trying to stay up for a call or be available more than we ordinarily would, to manage anxiety around the pressure of business or the pressure of getting things done, maybe make some, you know, quite sophisticated adjustments around technology or the use of social media or other platforms. And, you know, one of the reasons why the British cycling team was so successful is because they just did the 1%, just did the 1% every day. And I think thinking about changing your diet by 1%, changing your social habits, changing your drinking habits, changing your sleeping habits just by 1% would be my advice. Start really small and feel like you've achieved something.
Right, great. So one of the other things that is quite interesting to see, again, with this disproportionate level of news, it feels like that there is a sort of non-global approach to the way that we're handling this particular crisis. So therefore, we get a quite a contradictory viewpoint of you know, one country's lockdown versus the other. And a lot of us here in the UK would be quite interested in, we've now, you know, extended lockdown for another 3 weeks without a very clear exit strategy, which is one of the things that's probably causing a clear anxiety sets. In addition to that, you know, potentially around the you know, the knowledge of when we're going to be able to fully go back. Is the reality very much now that we are going to have to be able to adjust? And if so, how do we make those small adjustments in our mental state? Because for some that could be really challenging, and for some it could just be so easy.
Yeah. And I think we are we're used to anxiety in particular doses, and we're used to anxiety either at home or to do with starting something new, to do with particular rhythms around the way that we work, or by focusing on particular content in our work. And we're used to managing difference within those domains that feel familiar. One of the things that human beings love to do is to compare. It's one of the things that is centrally human, that, you know, a fox doesn't worry if he's foxy enough, but people often compare any number of things: their hair, their clothing, their job, the amount of money they make. And comparing is one of those things that can help, but it can also hinder. And I think there are very stark differences in the way that people are approaching both their work and their politics. And we can see at the kind of the micro in our own lives, the way that we're able to manage the difference between us and the people that we're living with, or our family members, or perhaps, you know, the distance that other people are happy to spend to stay away from us in a supermarket. That might be enough, or it might not be enough for us. And certainly at the kind of macro, there are very clear differences. I guess I would say it's really important to start to notice what's helpful for you. So it might be that there are some political leaders who, you know, live in a different country to you, and who aren't making decisions that affect you, but that you feel inspired by, or you feel calmed by. And we're living in an age where we can listen to a range of views. I would say be very thoughtful about what you pay attention to, and be very thoughtful about what you consume, both in terms of what you eat and drink, but also what you listen to, and really notice how it affects you. Because particularly late at night, what we know is that what we pay attention to for the last 30 to 90 minutes before we sleep, our brain pays attention to when we're asleep. So, you know, particularly watching the news late at night, especially if it feels like a lot that's being discussed is, like you say, very conflicting information, or is quite distressing, is perhaps not the best way to curate your sleep. So I would advise listening to the news during the day, picking a particular time, and picking a particular source of reporting that feels comfortable to you. I think we need to be even more responsible in these times about what we follow and what we consume, as well as what we lead with and how we give information.
That's great. And before we continue, we're getting some feedback on a little bit of technical noise. And Dr. Tweedie, if I could just ask, could you just try and lower your volume on your laptop so we can?
Yeah, I've tried to. Is that any better?
We'll find out shortly. So apologies if anyone has experienced any sort of feedback. I think we've just had a yes, that's okay from the producer. So we'll continue. I think you mentioned something really important there around sleep. And I know from personal experience, when I'm feeling anxious and unable to address certain things that are going on during my day, have overcommitted to doing something, or potentially worried about what I'm trying to deliver the next day. And that's just in a general setting, not necessarily in a specific crisis. So do you feel that sleep plays a massive part? Because I then have real trouble sleeping, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, because your mind is ticking in all different directions. Add on the added stress of what's going on in today's world, where on top of what you may be doing at work as your day-to-day, you're suddenly exposed to all this geopolitical stuff that's going on, plus additional financial stress possibly, and or potentially grief because you're in a situation where you've experienced loss, or may not necessarily be the death of a family member or a colleague or a friend, but potentially a loss of a job, or an opportunity, and so on and so forth. So it creates that. And again, I'm just speaking from personal experience. It may create a negative cycle. How can we address that through? I think you said sleep is a key thing, but there probably are a few other things in there as well.
Yeah, I think sleep is really key. I think rest is really key as well. If you look at elite athletes, they're as serious about their recovery as they are about their activity. And I would advise more rest than usual in these times. For myself, whilst I'm used to delivering therapy through a video platform, I'm not used to doing that as much as I have been doing in the last few weeks. And I'm really aware that difference has an impact on my my levels of activation, and I think it's really important to build in more rest. So I'm sure many of you know that sort of optimal amount of time to stay focused on something is about 90 minutes. Some people can do a little bit more, some people it's a little bit less. So every 90 minutes, I would advise that you build in some form of rest. And I don't mean sitting doing very little. For some people, that may be taking a small amount of exercise. For other people, that may be preparing a meal is a way to rest. For other people, it may be connecting with a friend or a family member. But that you're more thoughtful about building in scheduled rest periods through the day. And that you are particularly thoughtful about an 8-hour sleep window. So creating the time for at least 8 hours sleep. You may not sleep for all of those 8 hours, but to create a window for those 8 hours. And like I said before, to think about a sort of a 30 to 90 minute wind down period before you hope to fall asleep. And obviously there's little blue light in that time, but a lot of people find it useful to listen perhaps to funny or inspiring programs. So maybe those are TED Talks or TV programs, and I think it's really important to think of that period of time, that 30 to 90 minutes before you sleep, as an opportunity to curate the content of your sleep, so that you are really thoughtful about what you pay attention to. So when you were talking about feeling anxious, if you spend that time before you go to sleep worrying about very complex problems that you currently don't have any solutions for, they will be present in your dream state for a period of time while you're asleep. So it is better to do that worrying and to do that focusing about very complex problems a little earlier in the day, and again to schedule those and to be quite disciplined, as disciplined as you can, about paying attention to those things at that time and then switching your attention. And like I said earlier, just think about that 1%. If there's sort of 5 or 10 minutes of better quality wind down time that you can get before you go to sleep, that's great. Just extend it by a few minutes every few days.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to take a pause here, and we've got a couple of questions. For you, Dr. Tweedie. So the first one actually from Essen Longman, actually, she's asking this question. How's the lockdown psychology is going to impact our business after the lockdown?
So the information that we're getting from Wuhan, they've, incredibly been able to start to write some papers to share. And when I talk about papers, I'm talking about peer-reviewed journals. So this is quite high quality information that's been interrogated to some level. And what appears to be coming out of those observations by clinicians is that people are quite frightened about reintegrating into life in the way that it was before, and people have got a lot of health anxiety, understandably still concerned about whether they may contract coronavirus, whether the rates of transmission are going to remain low enough for people to feel safe. So I think it's really important to take the long view and to really pace yourself, and to think about it as a series of sprints, so that, we are all having that sensation of kind of hurry up and wait, provide something, change what you're doing, and find a way to kind of settle into that. And certainly, although I have no more information than any of you about the exit strategy from lockdown, I think it's really important to imagine your business continuing to change for some considerable period of time, because people's ability to focus and to re-engage after lockdown is going to be a process that I would say would be a dual model process. So in grief, we talk about the dual model of bereavement, because you're giving up something and you're also creating a new identity without the person or the job or the important object that you lost. So, people are going to lose the safety of being at home, and they're going to have to manage more anxiety as they're reintegrating and socializing. So I think it's important in terms of your business strategy to think about the period after lockdown as being at a time at which you, your staff members, and also your customers are going to need to be readjusting, and to find a way to phase that and pace that for people, so that you're not expecting again an enormous change post lockdown. I think that it's helpful to think about it in terms of phases, and that it would be kind and generous to yourself, your staff, and also your customers to be offering a phased model, to be thinking about people beginning to pick up more in person than they had been, and not to make too many demands on people, because it might take a little bit of time. I don't know if that answers the question that you asked, but that's the information that we're getting at the moment.
So I think there's a really important point in there, is that actually you're not alone in that change, right? That everyone is going to have to adjust, regardless of what type of business you're in. And I really I can resonate to the point around the anxiety of not knowing what's coming, because and something that we touched on before around enough data around how this is going to play out, that's still unfolding, and therefore becomes a very I would say it becomes a very complex way of trying to get to a safe zone, right? And so some of the discussions I've been having with some of my peers is, actually, even if lockdown is lifted tomorrow, I'm very unlikely to be able to jump on a tube, right? I'm not going to get on a bus, right? And so therefore there is this general fear that even if the situation is contained, it isn't eradicated, and there may be some time lag to that. Interesting. So another question that's come in around this is, so again for you, Dr. Tweedie, around some of the continuous negative information via private media, right, causing lots of distress. And the question is, would CBT help with this?
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to say, if you live in the UK and you are struggling with your mental health, there are lots of services that are available. And the Mental Health Trust that I work in is publishing information on social media platforms, and our primary care services, our secondary care services, our acute care services at all levels. We're continuing to provide therapy. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's an excellent therapeutic response to anxiety, and many therapists now, independent and in the NHS and in private groups, are able to use secure video platforms. So I myself have found that it's very easy to deliver therapy on a video platform. It's safe, it's secure. There are some video platforms that enable you to record your session, and so you've got that information then to reflect back on. And I think, given we're all in this situation, it's much better to have an opportunity to see a therapist without PPE. So, when I'm on the wards, when my colleagues are on the wards, we're needing to wear PPE in order to be safe. But that doesn't give you a sense of safety necessarily. It can feel quite unfamiliar. So using a video platform means you're really safe, you're socially distant enough that you don't need to protect yourself in any other way. And I think that it can be really helpful to, use online, particularly online CBT. It's got a lovely structure. It's really easy to understand. And I would recommend CBT certainly as a really useful therapeutic response to anxiety and depression. And the insomnia model that I use is a cognitive behavioral one, and that also is very effective.
Perfect, thank you. So we're talking a lot about individuals, and before I jump into some other questions, I just wanted to veer slightly to the employer. Again, very challenging times, and employers may not necessarily know how to effectively deal with mental health issues, especially if you're in a small business. So say you're in that 10 to 100 type environment, where they may not have a policy around any of this. They may not really know how to talk about it and break that barrier, and so much so that the individuals that are being affected may not have a mechanism to then be able to talk to their employer about it. So how could we help those types of individuals gain access to the right information?
I think it's really important to acknowledge your own limits and to acknowledge your own worries. If you're an employer, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, even if you're in an organisation that has an occupational health department or wellbeing practitioners that you can access, that it can feel really worrying, can feel quite frightening to ask somebody if they're okay, with the intention of really hearing that they're not okay. Often we use these as really methods of saying hello, how are you? Our intention is to connect with somebody at a very superficial level in order to kind of have a further conversation potentially about work. But when we ask that question, how are you, with the intention of hearing that somebody's not okay, it can feel quite frightening. And I would say, if you start to notice that somebody's behaviour is changing and you start to feel concerned, it's really important to think about who's the best person to ask. It may be you. It may be that there's somebody else in your team or somebody else who knows that person well, who would feel really able to do that. And, this is also a time for noticing strengths in colleagues and in friends and family members that perhaps you wouldn't have noticed before. So if you're quite a sensitive person and you're thinking to yourself, I wonder why, that person never turns on their video, or I wonder why, they're pitching up late for things. It's really important to ask and to accept that in asking, you might not necessarily get it right, that it might feel a bit awkward, or it might feel a bit difficult. That person might not know quite how much they want to share with you, but it is always the right thing to ask. And, particularly to ask difficult questions. If you feel that somebody's really struggling to say, do you sometimes feel that you can't go on? Do you sometimes feel that you're not able to manage? Because it's such an enormous relief, and it can literally save somebody's life to ask them, with the intention of really hearing that they're not okay. And so I would say make an attempt, but don't do it without resources yourself. You can look at the Mind website, you can look at the World Health Foundation website, the Mental Health Foundation website, the WHO. Lots of people are publishing information now to help people have these more difficult conversations. So do resource yourself, do take a bit of time, and maybe plan a bit more time. If you're going to have this kind of conversation, plan to have a little bit more flexibility in your schedule, because you might be a little bit nervous in approaching it, and you might need to give yourself a bit of time for that. And you might need to give yourself a bit of time to hear what the person has to say. Most crucially, I would say, don't feel that you have to have an answer. If somebody says that they're feeling depressed, if they say that they're feeling very anxious, don't feel that you have to fix it. In fact, when you first start talking about anxiety or depression, or using substances more than you would normally do in unhealthy ways, it can feel like someone's shutting you down if they give you too many solutions. So just feel as though it's possible to continue to listen, and to validate somebody's bravery and their courage in having that conversation with you. So don't worry about having to provide a solution. Don't worry about having to fix the problem. Simply asking those questions, giving somebody some time to explore for themselves how they're feeling, and then maybe saying, well, would you like me to see if I can find somewhere that might be, like the earlier question, would it be useful to try and find some online CBT, or would you like to perhaps talk with other people who've got a sit? Is there a kind of a group chat or a forum for these things? And I guess in these times, we might be finding out things about people that ordinarily they wouldn't discuss. So, somebody might have shared care arrangements, which are really complicated at this time, or they might be caring for a family member where they wouldn't have disclosed that to you before. Or you may observe things, as they're using a video platform, you may observe things in their environment that give you a kind of clear indication that there are things that they haven't told you. So be sensitive, be thoughtful, but if you are worried and if there's something that continues to come back to you, do address it, because it literally can save somebody's life.
So just on that point, because I think it's a really valid one. So if someone is actually in significant amounts of distress and require support, where should you as an individual go, or where should an employer go if they come across that type of behaviour?
In the UK, I would say that your first port of call, if you're concerned about a mental health issue, would be your GP. GPs are still operating, and primary care therapists are still working, and a lot of what they would normally offer now is available online. So you can remain socially distant and safe and still access their services. And your GP will be able to give you an indication, perhaps with a telephone call, of what they feel would be a useful place to start. And that may be a third sector provider or a charity. Mind is a fantastic example of a charity that provides really, really useful information and support to people. There are domestic violence charities, there are substance misuse charities that provide excellent support, telephone and now online support. So whether you feel that it's better to foreground the symptoms, so you want to think about use of alcohol, or whether you feel that there's a mental health issue behind it, like depression, I would contact your GP and let them know how you're doing and what you're worried about, and they'll be able to advise you about where to go from there.
Perfect. I've got a question later. So when designing and building your own home office workspace, what's important to keep in mind plants, light, spacing, etc. So you suddenly found yourself in an environment where you're no longer in an office, and things have changed, and you're using your own home space now as a workspace. So.
I would say it's really, really important to have a workspace. If you only have one room that you can operate from, or the room that you're using needs to also be, for example, your living room or your bedroom, I would create an area or a space that is your workspace. And I would create a little routine. You might amuse yourself in the journey to work. I've been listening on Radio 2 to the travel reports of lovely people saying, there's a hold up, there's a Lego toy in the way, or the washing's been put all over the floor, I can't get to the office. It's really important to maintain a sense of routine. We're creatures of habit. It is really important to get up and do those things that you would normally do before work, whether that's showering or particular routines around eating, to maintain those, to get dressed, and to go to work, even if that means that you're just moving from one room to another, or one part of the room to another. And then at the end of the day, or during rest periods, move away from your workspace, or put a blanket or a screen or a cover over your workspace so that you can rest. And particularly at the end of your day, close down your laptop, turn off your phone, or close down those aspects of your laptops and your phones that are related to work, and have a rest. It is really, really important. I would say turn your tech off if you can. And it in terms of the question about plants and lighting, I think now's a time to really take care of your environment. You're spending a lot of time in it. And if you're not going out for meals, if you're not spending money in other ways, now's a time to really think about what makes my home homely. You might want to spend some time going through old photos, or objects that are important to you from other times in your life, and to put those out. To really think about important family members or times in your life when you've enjoyed connecting with other people, and take some time to think about creating different places and spaces in your work environment, because it's so important to be able to switch off. And most of us are very visual. So the question is absolutely spot on.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So another thing I'd like to better understand, and again, a bit of negative press around all of this, with all of the efforts of our NHS being focused on COVID-19, a lot of misreports about other medical and also clinical activity being disregarded, and I find that relatively hard to believe. But for people that are got pre-existing mental health issues, or worried because of this crisis that they may not gain access to their care workers, their clinicians, and but also for large corporates that actually provide occupational health support to potentially people that have mental health issues at work, or suffer from depression or anxiety, or other things that are being managed. I assume that that's not the case, and support is there, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm really, really pleased to speak to that point. So certainly, in terms of my independent practice, I'm continuing to see people, very happy to see them online. In terms of the services that I'm currently working into in the NHS, we are all operating. We're operating slightly differently, and we're learning. I would say that for those people who are watching this because they're in the IT sector, you are our leaders, and you have information that we as clinicians need to absorb quickly. And you may need to very thoughtfully say things several times, and translate it into language that's very simple. But you guys have an opportunity to help us to deliver our services in a way that perhaps would have taken us a lot longer if we weren't in this current situation. So if you have ideas, if you can think about ways, secure platforms that we can use, ways that we can deliver psychological therapy and mental health support to people, and please let us know, because we are all working our normal hours and we're working as hard as we can, trying to take our own advice and resting. But yes, don't hold back. If you feel that you've got an issue that's out of what you can manage and that's causing you concern, and or a family member or a colleague, all services are operating. And if you are in need, the NHS will prioritise what you need and will support you.
Thank you for that. I think the conversation can be quite extensive, and I think there's a lot to talk about here. And I know that we've probably just sort of touched the tip of the iceberg with some of your great recommendations. But as a summary, Dr. Tweedie, it would be really good just to give a short view of, we're not alone. We have support from friends and family and colleagues. And there are plenty of resources, especially in the UK, through the right channels that can help us. There are tools out there to help you manage those stresses and anxieties. And if you're looking at wanting support from your local practice, your GP. So I think there's a good foundation to get there. What if your anxiety is about approaching the anxiety, if that makes any sense? If it's about just picking up the phone and having that conversation. So what kind of last words of enthusiasm would you give to those types of individuals that may just be worried about having the conversation in the first place?
I'm so passionate about my job. I absolutely love the work that I do, and I completely believe in it. And if it helps at all to say that the person that you're going to speak to really wants to hear what you have to say. They really want to understand the situation that you're in, and they really want to use the tools that they have to help you. Just like you do in your business when somebody rings you with a problem and you can provide them with a solution. Don't be afraid. The person who you're going to speak to wants to help and wants to understand. And I suppose now more than ever, we're in a scenario, and I don't think there's been a time in my life when I could say that it's been the case, but it is now, that we are all in this together. And whilst we're doing our best in different ways to cope with what we have, we're all experiencing something very, very similar, and we're all trying to connect with our loved ones and be the best that we can be, and carry on and find a way forward into hope and into life. So I would say, in reference to earlier parts of the conversation, listen out for information and for people who are speaking and who are leading, and choose what you follow. Be a follower with integrity, and really notice how things affect you, and yes, give a high level of regard for what you need.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to help answer some of those questions, and really sort of shedding some light on how we can better, all of us can deal, with some of these stressful topics. So on behalf of myself and Cybertalks, thank you so much, Dr. Tweedie, for taking that time.
Absolute pleasure.
And I wish you a really good afternoon, and for you to stay safe, of course. And hopefully we could have you back on at some point in the near future, just to see how you're doing, of course, as well.
Yeah, perfect. You take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.